I would like to give you a brief introduction on the role of civil society in this whole setup. But before I start, I can only confirm from the information I have today that elections on the 5th of June, that's a dream, but it's a distant dream. This is not going to work, so don't do that. It's not an option. The conditions for free and fair elections and what we call in English a level playing field are not there. Are not met, so no elections on the 5th of June, out of the question. Concerning civil society and the role of civil society, what is important? Basically, we always tend to divide our society in politicians, political parties, and then there is also something strange somewhere in the shadow. That's what we call civil society. This is a wrong perception. Essentially, civil society is a group of people in the society who engage and deal with politics. But politics from a different perspective. You are not sitting in a municipal council, you are not sitting in parliament, you are not discussing legislation, but you are on a day-to-day basis dealing with the interest of the people. You are in essence at the service of the citizens. You read, you listen to them, you receive the messages, you convey the messages to politicians, you make all kinds of proposals, and you try to move this political process in the right direction. That's essentially what civil society is doing in any country, certainly also in your country. The problem is, of course, that what we observe here, there is a complete disconnect between politics, where people believe that they belong to some kind of elite on top of the system, and civil society, basically, essentially close to the citizens. The disconnect of politicians results, for example, in a very strange symptom, which I call Weltfremdlichkeit, I think something like that in German. Basically, politicians are disconnected from the citizens, are disconnected from reality. What I would like to see one day is that young people, that people like you stand up and say, I would like to be a politician, because that type of politician, that's my ambition. That you listen to real charismatic politicians and you say, okay, that's my role model, that's the type of politician I would like to be, I dream of to be one day this type of politician. I don't see that. People, you talk about politicians without enthusiasm. When I ask people around, young people, older people, no one has this ideal politician in front of him or her. So that's one of the big gaps, I would say, in this society. On the other hand, politics needs to start this kind of bottom-up approach. I always say what I would like to see one day is that the beekeepers would stand up and would say, we would like to have a higher price for our honey. We are going to defend our rights, we will establish our own political party. That's the bottom-up approach. That's the type of leverage that I would like, and we hope one day that civil society will get to the point that you engage people and you push people to engage in politics, to better defend the interest of the citizens. That's the main aim. Coming back to civil society, one other element which is important is basically, when I talk about civil society, there are different categories of civil society. You have the think tanks. Many of you are belonging to think tanks. Extremely important, because I consider you to be the brains of this civil society, representing this interest, but also translating the interest into something that can one day become a real political issue in parliament or whatever it is. That should be the case. On the other hand, you have the purely grassroots NGOs dealing with practical needs, refugees, for example. They have several NGOs dealing with that, to give you one example. Healthcare issues, psychiatric patients and so on, that are left on their own often. And you have a lot of NGOs either in development, either established NGOs dealing with particular needs of people. Besides that, of course, you have academia. I consider that also part of civil society. You have all kinds of associations, media associations, not to name them. You also have the trade unions, a very important part of the civil society. Unfortunately, most of it is a little bit, to say the least, dysfunctional in your country, but keep an eye on that. I think we need to think about strategies to redevelop also the trade unions, because in any normal democratic system, they play a very important role in maintaining also the level between, or the balance between politics, civil society, employment issues and so on. Now when it comes to negotiations, initially the agreement was concluded between the 4 major parties. The first problem is, of course, what about all the smaller parties? And you have a lot of smaller parties completely out of the picture. What about the other non-majority communities? Yes, the Albanians are involved with 2 parties. Yes, the Macedonians are involved with 2 parties. But I don't see many representatives from the Turkish community, the Roma community, all the other communities. They are not there. They are apparently absent in the whole debate. That's also one of my concerns. What we try to do from the very beginning, we said to the different political parties representing their particular interest, we said we start the negotiations and each party is allowed to bring 2 experts during the whole negotiations with them, with the idea, of course, that at least some of the parties would use the opportunity to bring in civil society representatives. SDSM did this from time to time. For example, when we had media discussions, they brought in from time to time some people. VMRO systematically refused to bring in experts. The politicians claimed we know everything, which is a bit an overestimation of themselves, to say the least. The Albanian parties also were not really interested in bringing in any experts. They were invited to do that. That was the internal rule of the way of working. They didn't do that. My first big disappointment. What we then tried to do was we tried to engage civil society in a different way by providing them briefings from time to time. And then immediately, of course, we got problems with the international community, who was not happy with some statements and discussions that we had during these meetings. Whereas I always say, essentially in any negotiation process, what's most important is the fact that the people have the right to know. Today, I don't know what's ongoing. I have some ideas, we have the gossips, we have the rumors, we have some information from inside. But I can tell you today, the big deficiency of the whole negotiation process is exactly that, yes, the people have the right to know, but today you don't know anything. I can ask any of you, I don't think that any one of you will be able to provide me any update on what's ongoing. This is not only not normal, this is simply not acceptable. This is not good. So in terms of engaging people now, there are different ways. We can of course invite all citizens, but that's going to be very difficult to represent different interests, to reach agreement. It's extremely complicated. We have been going through such experiments also in Belgium, where we invited groups of 1,000 people and had lengthy discussions for several days, which is very interesting. Nowadays, with electronic media, with communication, internet and so on, you can do this kind of direct democracy experiments. But it's still very difficult. And usually it ends with the people who can shout the loudest and are the most affirmative, who get most out of it. That's one of the problems. When it comes to civil society, I still believe that civil society, because of the fact that you are close to the citizens, you can represent in a way, in an alternative way, compared to politicians, also the citizens very well. You know what are the needs, you know what are the interests of the citizens, so you are able to represent them properly. In a country where the political system is close to deficient, I'm not only talking about the ruling coalition, but also about the opposition, it's not good. the opposition is not capable, at least at this point also, to take over the power and to run this and to make and to arrive at a really, truly liberal democracy soon. They will need all the support that they can get from civil society, from think tanks, from any organization, because without you, it will fail again. That's my fear. Now, coming back to your role, I believe, yes, you should have a role and you should be very explicit also towards the international community, but also towards the political parties here, and you can tell them, not without us. We are part of this society, we are an important part. We can represent in an alternative way the citizens, and we will represent the citizens. We do that on the daily protest, but we can do that also around any negotiation table, and we do want to represent the citizens. The big advantages of this would be at least that you recreate a kind of balance during negotiations, because so far you have one party which is extremely dominant and all the other parties are somewhere below the table. In order to restore the balance, to restore the level playing field, it would be very beneficial, I think, for any negotiation process to have civil society on board and to include you also constructively in the discussions. Not only just be there to monitor, but participate in the discussions as well. In the end, the future not only belongs to the politicians, also belongs to civil society, because you are closer in a way to the interests of the citizens that you will represent. Now, finally, when it comes to next steps, I already told you in the beginning, elections on the 5th of June, that's off the table. The second issue is, what are the alternatives? And I strongly believe there is only one way forward. Yes, there might be a need at some point for negotiations, but you can only negotiate with reasonable people, with reasonable parties. Yes, you can negotiate with reasonable parties, but also the conditions need to be met. The issue of the presidential pardons, that's a no-go, that's a red alert, I would say, that needs to be fixed first. The function of the president, I think, yes, in the end, you have the right to have accountable politicians, politicians who are responsible, who can take the responsibility to do whatever they are expected to do. And if they don't do well, if they don't behave in line with the constitution and the law, they should bear the consequences of this and they should resign. Yeah? This is the case for your president. It is the case for many other people in the political structures that I see today. Yeah? The alternative is, yes, bring in civil society, grant you a solid role in this whole environment, and make sure that you can play a constructive role in the future. But in order to do that also you need to prepare and to be prepared to play an important role. And you're not going to do that alone. You cannot start fighting around with civil society organizations. You need to do that together. So you need to come up with consistent ideas, with a kind of strategic plan as well, that's very important, to jointly put on the table and to tell everyone, your own interlocutors, the political parties, the international community, to tell them that's what we want to do, that's where we go for. This is the next step, this is what we need to do. And please, first fix the problems, and then as the cherry on the cake, I would say, in the end of the whole process, we can think about elections. From my experience in negotiation processes, having elections and claiming that this will restore democracy, that's not a good idea. Don't do that. First solve the problems, then go for elections.